Welcome to Super Enzyme Justice League. Today we are talking about the Electoral College. Now, if you haven't already noticed, this is a super long video, so I'll tell you what. If you stick around until the end, I'll show you how you can become the President of the United States in November with only a little less than 22% of the population actually voting for you thanks to the Electoral College. Ready? In the United States of America, we have a little thing called the President, and every 4 years, all American citizens, regardless of socioeconomic backgrounds, come out to vote for a new president. Except, no. First things first, all American citizens is a stretch considering that only about 60% of Americans vote in presidential elections. Secondly, the people who do vote are not voting for the president directly. This is because of the Electoral College, which, sadly, only about 34% of the American population understands. So for the other 66%, I dedicate this video to you. Every 4 years, when you go to the polls, and you really should, I mean you're voting for the guy who can shoot these, you cast a ballot that looks something like this because American politics is essentially ruled by a two-party system. Either way, you leave the polling place feeling as though you just cast a vote for the president, and whichever guy or gal gets the most votes is given the crown and the scepter and the keys to fire these bad boys. But what you actually voted for is a group of electors who really get to vote for the president. To these electors, your ballot is really more of a suggestion than anything else, but we'll get back to that later. Your state's electors are given a certain number of electoral votes, which are determined by adding the number of senators, which is always 2, to the number of your state's members of the House of Representatives, a house of, wait for it, representatives based on the state's population. These two numbers together equal your state's electoral votes, which vary in number from state to state and year to year, but are never below 3, a total across all states to 538, requiring any candidate to get at least 270 electoral votes to win the presidency, which creates obvious problems that we'll get back to later. Say the popular election looks something like this in your state. That means that the electors have to give your state's electoral votes to candidate A, right? Well, this is where we run into the problems with the Electoral College. Your state's electors do not have to vote according to the popular vote. So if candidate A won the popular election, the electors, and I can't stress this enough, really should vote for candidate A, but they are not obligated to. Now, some states have laws in place that say if the electors vote for somebody other than who the majority of the people in the state voted for, they're basically fired, so that's somewhat comforting. And it's also worth noting that while some electors have deviated in the past from the majority vote, it has never significantly changed the outcome of an election. Now on to problem number 2, simply called winner take all, also known as first past the post. To explain this problem, let me illustrate it with an example. To avoid allowing any of my personal biases against states to show through, Georgia, I have helpfully invented 2 new states, Oklahoma and North Florida. As you can see, each state is divided into 3 districts, and each has a population of roughly 3 million. Since each state has 2 Senate seats and 3 districts which give 3 representatives, the states each have 5 electoral votes. So election day rolls around and the results are very close this year. Candidate A seems to have the votes though, with 51% of both Oklahoma and North Florida. So with the electoral college system in place, these results give candidate A 10 electoral votes and 0 electoral votes to candidate B. While this seems logical with just 2 states, this can really add up across the whole country. Before we move on to our third problem with the Electoral College, allow me to introduce a complication. Candidate C, a nice moderate choice between candidate A and candidate B. Now typically, as one of the pitfalls of first past the post, third-party candidates like candidate C rarely do well, and this election is no exception. The results are in for both states and candidate A wins, but only with 42% of the population in each state. And this election, 58% of the people don't want candidate A to win, however he still receives 10 electoral votes while candidates B and C receive no electoral votes. An easy solution to this problem would be to give a total of 4.2 electoral votes to candidate A, 4.0 to candidate B, and 1.8 to candidate C. It's important to remember that we are not factoring in the entire country in this scenario, and that as the numbers scale up, it becomes increasingly clear that this solution would give a third-party candidate a better chance at winning the entire country. However, under the current winner-take-all system, 10 votes would go to candidate A, which does not truly reflect the opinion of 58% of the population in these 2 states. Now on to problem number 3. It's election day, and we are looking at the whole United States now. Candidate A, candidate B, and candidate C are all running. Candidate C, as a third-party candidate, has done an incredible amount of fundraising and has managed to accrue quite a bit of political support. However, he does still not have enough to win. The final election results give candidate A 250 electoral votes, candidate B 213 electoral votes, and candidate C 75 electoral votes. Candidate A has a majority, and now everyone can pack up, go home, the end, congratulations candidate A, right? Yeah, no, the Constitution itself has specifically designed the political landscape to be 2 parties, and a successful third candidate throws a wrench into the whole system. The Constitution stipulates that a majority of the electoral votes must be achieved to win the presidency, which as I mentioned earlier is 270. No candidate has reached 270 electoral votes, so now what? Glad you asked. If the Electoral College ties or no candidate has a majority, the House of Representatives, a house full of, wait for it, representatives, will break the tie. However, the representatives must vote collectively as states, not as individual representatives, so instead of 435 representatives voting, it's 435 representatives voting as 50 states. So the 3 representatives in North Florida must put forth 1 vote. The same happens for the vice president, just in the Senate. This means that there can be a president from one party and a vice president from another, which may be a little awkward for the 2 of them. However, since the House of Representatives is voting as 50 states and the Senate has 100 members, both even numbers, they may each tie. If the House ties, the vice president elected by the Senate becomes the acting president until the House can decide, and if both the House and the Senate are tied, the Speaker of the House becomes the acting president until the Senate or the House can make up its mind, which may give the Speaker some motivation for prolonging the experience. Now for the final and probably the biggest problem of the Electoral College, how much your vote counts. Everyone's vote should count equally, but the Electoral College makes sure that some people's votes count more than others. Let me explain. If the 538 votes that make up the Electoral College were spread evenly among the American population of about 309 million, each electoral electoral vote should represent roughly 574,000 people, but now take Ohio and all of its 11.5 million people, for example. Ohio should get about 20 electoral votes then, right? Well, Ohio only gets 18 electoral votes, effectively disenfranchising around 1.2 million Ohioans. So where do those 2 missing electoral votes go? To states like Rhode Island. Rhode Island has a population of 1.1 million and should have 2 electoral votes, but instead it gets 4. Why? Because according to the Electoral College, as I previously explained, each state must have a minimum of 3 electoral votes. This means that Georgia, Virginia, Michigan, and New Jersey are all cheated out of 1 electoral vote. Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Ohio, and Illinois are all cheated out of 2 electoral votes. Florida is slighted 4 votes, New York is scammed from 5, Texas 6, and finally California is missing 10 electoral votes to accurately represent its citizens. These missing votes are redistributed to smaller states like Maine and New Hampshire. This means that the vote of a citizen of Wyoming has the same voting power of 4 Californians. Just gotta let that sink in for a minute. So let's learn how you can become the President of the United States in November with only a little less than 22% of the population actually voting for you thanks to the Electoral College. Here's what you do. You win the favor of the people in the states who count the most, like Wyoming and Vermont, and pay no attention to people who count the least, like the Texans and the Californians. So just get half of the population plus 1 person in each of these states to vote for you, and then you win the presidency. So go to Wyoming, DC, Vermont, North Dakota, Alaska, South Dakota, Delaware, Montana, Rhode Island, New Hampshire, Maine, Hawaii, Idaho, Nebraska, West Virginia, New Mexico, Nevada, Utah, Kansas, Arkansas, Mississippi, Iowa, Connecticut, Oklahoma, Oregon, Kentucky, Louisiana, South Carolina, Alabama, Colorado, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Maryland, Missouri, Tennessee, Arizona, Indiana, Massachusetts, Virginia, and New Jersey. Good work, Mr. Madam President. By utilizing the terribly unfair and unjust electoral college system and by winning states, not people, you become the president regardless of the fact that 78% of the population did not want you as their president. This has happened 3 times in history where the candidate with the most votes loses thanks to the electoral college, so it's not that far out of the realm of possibility. So if we abolish the electoral college and just let people vote like how every other nation has voted since the dawn of democracy, all these problems, except those associated with first past the post, will be solved. Because remember kids, winning by millions of votes is no better than winning by a single vote. Did you enjoy this episode? Put a like down there, and if you want to see more, don't forget to subscribe. If you have a question about the electoral college or anything else, put it in the comments. We'll do our best.